Jujutsu is a Japanese martial art and a method of close combat for defeating an armed and armored opponent in which one uses no weapon or only a short weapon. Ju can be translated to mean gentle, soft, supple, flexible, pliable, or yielding. Quote, Jutsu can be translated to mean art or technique, and represents manipulating the opponent's force against himself rather than confronting it with one's own force. Jujutsu developed to combat the samurai of feudal Japan as a method for defeating an armed and armored opponent in which one uses no weapon, or only a short weapon, because striking against an armored opponent proved ineffective. Practitioners learned that the most efficient methods for neutralizing an enemy took the form of pins, joint locks, and throws. These techniques were developed around the principle of using an attacker's energy against him, rather than directly opposing it. There are many variations of the art, which leads to a diversity of approaches. Jujutsu schools may utilize all forms of grappling techniques to some degree. In addition to Jujutsu, many schools teach the use of weapons. Today, Jujutsu is practiced in both traditional and modern sports forms. Derived sport forms include the Olympic sport and martial art of Judo, which was developed by Kano Jigoro in the late 19th century from several traditional styles of Jujutsu, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was derived from earlier versions of Kodokan Judo. History. Origins. Jujutsu first began during the Sengoku period of the Muromachi period, combining various Japanese martial arts which were used on the battlefield for close combat in situations where weapons were ineffective, in contrast to the neighboring nations of China and Okinawa, whose martial arts were centered around striking techniques. Japanese hand-to-hand combat forms focused heavily upon throwing, immobilizing, joint locks and choking as striking techniques were ineffective towards someone wearing armor on the battlefield. The original forms of Jujutsu such as Takenouchi-yu also extensively taught parrying and counterattacking long weapons such as swords, a spear, a dagger, or other small weapon. In the early 17th century during the Edo period, Jujutsu would continue to evolve due to the strict laws which were imposed by the Tokugawa shogunate to reduce war's influence by the Chinese. Social philosophy of Neo-Confucianism, which was obtained during Hideyoshi's invasions of Korea and spread throughout Japan via scholars such as Fujiwara Seika. During this new ideology, weapons and armor became unused decorative items, so hand-to-hand combat flourished as a form of self-defense, and new techniques were created to adapt to the changing situation of unarmored opponents. This included the development of various striking techniques in Jujutsu which expanded upon the limited striking previously found in Jujutsu, which targeted vital areas above the shoulders such as the eyes, throat, and back of the neck. However, towards the 18th century, the number of striking techniques was severely reduced as they were considered less effective and exert too much energy. Instead, striking in Jujutsu primarily became used as a way to distract the opponent or to unbalance him in the lead-up to a joint lock, strangle, or throw. During the same period, the numerous Jujutsu schools would challenge each other to duels, which became a popular pastime for warriors under a peaceful, unified government. For these challenges, Randori was created to practice without risk of breaking the law, and the various styles of each school evolved from combating each other without intention to kill. The term Jujutsu was not coined until the 17th century, after which time it became a blanket term for a wide variety of grappling-related disciplines and techniques. Prior to that time, these skills had names such as short sword grappling, wrestling, grappling, body art, softness, art of harmony, catching hand, and even the way of softness. Today, the systems of unarmed combat that were developed and practiced during the Muromachi period are referred to collectively as Japanese old-style Jujutsu. At this period in history, the systems practiced were not systems of unarmed combat, but rather means for an unarmed or lightly armed warrior to fight a heavily armed and armored enemy on the battlefield. In battle, it was often impossible for a samurai to use his long sword or polearm, and would, therefore, be forced to rely on his short sword, dagger, or bare hands. When fully armored, the effective use of such minor weapons necessitated the employment of grappling skills. Methods of combat included striking, throwing, restraining, and weaponry. Defensive tactics included blocking, evading, off-balancing, blending, and escaping. Minor weapons such as the tanto, ryo, fundo kusari, kabuto wari, and kakushibuki were almost always included in sengoku Jujutsu. Development in later times, other koryu developed into systems more familiar to the practitioners of Nippon Jujutsu commonly seen today. These are correctly classified as Edo Jujutsu. They generally designed to deal with opponents neither wearing armor nor in a battlefield environment. Most systems of Edo Jujutsu include extensive use of artemi waza, which would be of little use against an armored opponent on a battlefield. They would, however, be quite valuable in confronting an enemy or opponent during peacetime dressed in normal street attire. Occasionally, inconspicuous weapons such as tanto or tessen were included in the curriculum of Edo Jujutsu. Another seldom seen historical side is a series of techniques originally included in both Sengoku and Edo Jujutsu systems. Referred to as hojo waza, it involves the use of a hojo cord to restrain or strangle an attacker. These techniques have for the most part faded from use in modern times, but Tokyo police units still train in the use and continue to carry a hojo cord in addition to handcuffs. The very old Takenouchi-yu is one of the better recognized systems that continue extensive training in hojo waza. Since the establishment of the Meiji period with the abolishment of the samurai and the wearing of swords, the ancient tradition of Yagyu Shingan-yu has focused much towards the jujutsu contained in its syllabus. Many other legitimate Nippon Jujutsu exist but are not considered koryu. These are called either Gendai Jujutsu or Modern Jujutsu. Modern Jujutsu traditions were founded after or towards the end of the Tokugawa period when more than 2,000 schools of Jujutsu existed. Various traditional Yuan-ra that are commonly thought of as Koryu Jujutsu are actually Gendai Jujutsu. Although modern information, very few Gendai Jujutsu systems have direct historical links to ancient traditions and are incorrectly referred to as traditional martial systems, or Yu. The curriculum reflects an obvious bias towards Edo Jujutsu systems as opposed to the Sengoku Jujutsu systems. The improbability of confronting an armor-clad attacker is the reason for this bias. Over time, Gendai Jujutsu has been embraced by law enforcement officials worldwide and continues to be the foundation for many specialized systems used by police. Perhaps the most famous of these specialized police systems is the Kaisatsu Jutsu Taihojutsu system formulated and employed by the Tokyo Police Department. Jujutsu techniques have been the basis for many military unarmed combat techniques for many years. Since the early 1900s, every military service in the world has an unarmed combat course that has been founded on the principal teachings of Jujutsu. There are many forms of sports Jujutsu, the original and most popular being Judo, now an Olympic sport. One of the most common is mixed-style competition competitions, where competitors apply a variety of strikes, throws, and holds to score points. There are also kata competitions, where competitors of the same style perform techniques and are judged on the performance. There are also freestyle competitions, where competitors take turns attacking each other and a defender is judged on performance. Another more recent form of competition growing much more popular in Europe is the random attack form of competition, which is similar to randori but more formalized. Description: Japanese Jujutsu systems typically emphasize more on throwing, pinning, and joint locking techniques as compared with martial arts such as karate, which rely more on striking techniques. Striking techniques were seen as less important in most older Japanese systems because of the protection of samurai body armor and were used as setups for the grappling techniques. In Jujutsu, practitioners train in the use of many potentially fatal moves. However, because students mostly train in a non-competitive environment, the risk is minimized. Students are taught break-falling skills to allow them to safely practice otherwise dangerous throws. The word Jujutsu can be broken down into two parts. Ju is a concept. The idea behind this meaning of Ju is to be gentle, to give way, to yield, to blend, to move out of harm's way. Jutsu is the principle or the action part of Jujutsu. In Japanese this word means science or art, schools and derivatives and others. Because Jujutsu contains so many facets, it has become the foundation for a variety of styles and derivations today. As each instructor incorporated new techniques and tactics into what was taught to him originally, he could codify and create his own newer federation to help other instructors, schools, and clubs. Some of these schools modified the source material so much that they no longer considered themselves a style of Jujutsu. In around 1600 there were over 2,000 Japanese Jujutsu, and common features characterized most of them. Specific technical characteristics varied from school to school. Many of the generalizations noted above do not hold true for some schools of Jujutsu. Old schools of Japanese Jujutsu include derivatives and influences. Some examples of martial arts that have developed from or have been influenced by Jujutsu are Aikido, Bartitsu, Hapkido, Judo, Kaju Kenbo, Krav Maga, Kapap, Pangamoto, and Kenpo. Some schools also went on to influence modern Japanese karate. A major Japanese divergence occurred in 1905 when a number of Jujutsu schools joined the Kodokan. The relationships between schools and styles can be complex. For example, the Wado-Yu school of karate is partially descended from Shindo-Yoshin Jujutsu, itself in turn influenced by Okinawan karate. Aikido is a modern martial art developed in the 1910s and 1930s by Morihei Ueshiba from the system of Daito-Yu Aikijujutsu techniques to focus on the spiritual principle of harmony which distinguishes Budo from Bujutsu. Ueshiba was an accomplished student of Takeda Sokaku. Aikido is a systemic refinement of defensive techniques from Aikijujutsu in ways that are intended to prevent harm to either the attacker or the defender. Aikido evolved much during Ueshiba's lifetime, so earlier styles are more like the original Aikijujutsu than ones that more resemble the techniques and philosophy that Ueshiba stressed. Towards the end of his life, Bartitsu Jujutsu was first introduced to Europe in 1898 by Edward William Barton Wright, who had studied Tenjin Shinryo-Yu and Shinden Fudo-Yu in Yokohama and Kobe. He also trained briefly at the Kodokan in Tokyo. Upon returning to England, he folded the basics of all of these styles, as well as boxing, savate, and forms of stick fighting, into an eclectic self-defense system called Bartetsu. Judo. Modern Judo is a classic example of a sport that derived from Jujutsu and became distinct. Many who study Judo believe, as Kano did, that Judo is not a sport but a self-defense system creating a pathway towards peace and universal harmony. Another layer removed. Some popular arts had instructors who studied one of these Jujutsu derivatives and later made their own derivative succeed in competition. This created an extensive family of martial arts and sports that can trace the lineage to Jujutsu in some part. The way an opponent is dealt with also depends on the teacher's philosophy with regard to combat. This translates also in different styles or schools of Jujutsu. Because in Jujutsu every conceivable technique is allowed, there is unlimited choice of techniques. By contrast, Judo emphasizes grappling and throwing, while Karate emphasizes punching and kicking. Not all Jujutsu was used in sporting contests, but the practical use in the samurai world ended circa 1890. Techniques like hair pulling and eye poking are not considered acceptable in sport. Thus, they are excluded from judo competitions around Ori. However, Judo did preserve the more lethal, dangerous techniques in its kata. The kata were intended to be practiced by students of all grades but now are mostly practiced formally as complete set routines for performance, kata competition, and grading, rather than as individual self-defense techniques in class. However, Judo retained the full set of choking and strangling techniques for its sporting form and all manner of joint locks. Even Judo's pinning techniques have pain-generating, spine-on-rib squeezing and smothering aspects. A submission induced by a legal pin is considered a legitimate win. Kano viewed the safe contest aspect of Judo as an important part of learning how to control an opponent's body in a real fight. Kano always considered Judo a form of, and a development of, Jujutsu. A Judo technique starts with gripping your opponent, followed by off-balancing them and using the momentum against them, and then applying the technique. Kuzushi is also used in Jujutsu, where the opponent's attack is deflected using the momentum against them in order to arrest their movements, then throw them or pin them with a technique, thus controlling the opponent. In both systems, Kuzushi is essential in order to use as little energy as possible. Jujutsu differs from Judo in a number of ways. In some circumstances, judoka generate Kuzushi by striking one's opponent along his weak line. Other methods of generating Kuzushi include grabbing, twisting, or poking areas of the body known as artemi points or pressure points. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was developed after Mitsuyo Mida brought judo to Brazil in 1914. Mida agreed to teach the art to Luiz Franca and Carlos Gracie, son of his friend, businessman and politician Gastão Gracie. Luiz Franca went on to teach it to Oswaldo Fada. After Carlos learned the art from Mida, he passed his knowledge to his brothers Oswaldo, Gastão Jr., and George. Meanwhile, Helio Gracie would peek in and practice the techniques, although he was told he was too young to practice. At the time, Judo was still commonly called Kano Jiu-Jitsu, which is why this derivative of Judo is called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rather than Brazilian Judo. Its emphasis shifted to ground grappling because the Gracie family thought it was more efficient and much more practical. Carlos and Helio helped the development by promoting fights, competitions and experimenting throughout decades of intense training. BJJ dominated the first large modern mixed martial arts competitions, causing the emerging field to adopt many of its practices. Less practice stand-up techniques in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu remain from its Judo and Jujutsu heritage. Sambo. Sambo is a Russian martial art and sport derived from Japanese Judo and traditional Russian styles of folk wrestling. One of Sambo's founders, Vasily Oskepkov, was one of the first foreigners to learn Judo in Japan and earned a second-degree black belt awarded by Kano Jigoro himself. Modern sports Sambo is similar to sports Judo, a sport Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, with differences including a use of a jacket and shorts rather than a full keikogi, as well as a higher occurrence of leg locks. Modern schools. After the transplantation of traditional Japanese Jujutsu to the West, many of these more traditional styles underwent a process of adaptation at the hands of Western practitioners, molding the art of Jujutsu to suit Western culture in its myriad varieties. There are today many distinctly westernized styles of Jujutsu that stick to the Japanese roots to varying degrees. Some of the largest post-Reformation Jujutsu schools include of new branches of Jujutsu. Sport Jujutsu. There are many types of sports Jujutsu. One version of sports Jujutsu is known as JJIF Rules Sports Jujutsu, organized by Jiu-Jitsu International Federation, and has been recognized an official sport of the World Games. Sport Jujutsu comes in three main variants. Duo, where both the Tori and the Uke come from the same team and demonstrate self-defense techniques. In this variant, we have a special system named random attacks. The Tori and the Uke are also from the same team, but here they don't know what the attack will be. The attack is given by the judges. The second variant is the fighting system, where competitors combine striking, grappling and submissions under rules which emphasize safety. Many of the potentially dangerous techniques such as scissor takedowns, necklocks and digital choking and locking are prohibited in sport Jujutsu. There are a number of other styles of sport Jujutsu with varying rules. The third variant is the Japanese NWAZA system, where competitors start standing up and work for a submission. Striking is not allowed. Etymology. Jujutsu, the current standard spelling, is derived using the Hepburn romanization system. Before the first half of the 20th century, however, Japanese Jujitsu were preferred, even though the romanization of the second kanji as jitsu is unfaithful to the standard Japanese pronunciation. Since Japanese martial arts first became widely known of in the West in the time period, these earlier spellings are still common in many places. Jiu-Jitsu is still a common spelling in France, Canada, the United Kingdom and the United States, while Japanese Jiu-Jitsu is most widely used in Germany and Brazil. Some define Jujutsu and similar arts rather narrowly as unarmed, close combat systems used to defeat or control an enemy who is similarly unarmed. Basic methods of attack include hitting or striking, thrusting or punching, kicking, throwing, pinning or immobilizing, strangling, and joint locking. Great pains were also taken by the Bushi to develop effective methods of defense, including parrying or blocking strikes, thrusts and kicks, receiving throws or joint locking techniques, releasing oneself from an enemy's grasp, and changing or shifting one's position to evade and neutralize an attack. As Jujutsu is a collective term, some schools adopted the principle of Ju more than others. From a broader point of view, based on the curricula of many of the classical Japanese arts themselves, however, these arts may perhaps be more accurately defined as unarmed methods of dealing with an enemy who is armed, together with methods of using minor weapons such as the Jut, Tanto, or Kaku Shibuki, such as the Ryo Fundo Kusari or the Banko Kachoki, to defeat both armed or unarmed opponents. Furthermore, the term Jujutsu was also sometimes used to refer to tactics for infighting used with the warrior's major weapons: katana, itachi, yari, naginata, and jobo. These close combat methods were an important part of the different martial systems that were developed for use on the battlefield. They can be generally characterized as either Sengoku Jidai Kachubu Jutsu or Wakumi Uchi, or Edo Jidai Suhada Bujutsu. The Chinese character is the same as the first one in Judo. The Chinese character is the same as the second one in heritage and philosophy. Japanese culture and religion have become intertwined into the martial arts. Buddhism, Shinto, Taoism and Confucian philosophy coexist in Japan, and people generally mix and match to suit. This reflects the variety of outlook one finds in the different schools. Jujutsu expresses the philosophy of yielding to an opponent's force rather than trying to oppose force with force. Manipulating an opponent's attack using his force and direction allows Jujutsuka to control the balance of their opponent and hence prevent the opponent from resisting the counterattack.